When are we going to have our next date?
I'm not sure. My schedule's pretty full.
You need to loosen up. Let me take care of you. Just be my man and I'll really treat you like a king that you are. Look at you. Don't tell me you're still mad at me. I'm sorry. Please, let's go.
I'm sorry, I have to go. I'll call you. I really needed a hand there and you came through. How did you know to do that?
I saw how helpless you felt back there.
Julian turned to thank her, his heart racing from the adrenaline of finally saying no to his father's demands. He looked at Ava, really looked at her, and felt a spark he hadn't felt in years. She was beautiful, but it was her courage that truly stunned him. He went to ask for her name, but Ava just smiled, told him to live his own life, and hopped into a passing taxi. She was gone before he could even blink, leaving behind only the scent of jasmine. Julian stood on the sidewalk for a long time, staring at the spot where the taxi had been. He went back to his penthouse, but the silence felt heavy. He couldn't stop thinking about the girl who had saved him. He didn't know her name, her number, or where she worked. For the first time in his life, his billions felt useless because they couldn't buy him a second chance with her. He stayed up all night, pacing his floor, realizing that he had finally met the only woman who didn't want anything from him. The next morning, Julian called his private investigator. He gave him a location of the restaurant and a description of the angel in the blue dress. He told the investigator to drop everything else. His father called, screaming about the ruined merger and the trashy girl Julian was seen with, but Julian hung up on him. He realized that the blind date was the end of his old life, and finding Ava was the start of his new one. He wasn't going to let his father's shadow haunt him anymore. The investigator found her within 48 hours. Her name was Ava, she was a schoolteacher, and she lived in a modest apartment on the edge of the city. Julian didn't send a car or an assistant. He drove himself to her neighborhood, feeling more nervous than he ever did in a boardroom. He found her at a local park, sitting on a bench with a book. When she looked up and saw him standing there, her eyes widened. He didn't say anything at first. He just sat down next to her and handed her a single jasmine flower. The hour ends with Julian confessing that he had spent every second since the restaurant looking for her. He told her that he had lived his whole life doing what his father wanted, but he wanted to spend the rest of it doing what made him happy. Ava laughed and told him he was crazy for tracking her down, but she didn't tell him to leave. As they sat together, a black car with tinted windows pulled up across the street. Julian's father was watching from the back seat, his face twisted in a mask of cold fury. Julian began visiting Ava every day, leaving the high-rise office early to sit in her small kitchen. He traded his 5-course meals for her homemade pasta, and for the first time, he felt at peace. He told her about the pressure of the Vane Empire and how he felt like a bird in a golden cage. Ava listened, offering him the one thing no one else ever had, a safe place to be himself. But Julian's father wasn't done. He viewed Ava as a distraction that needed to be removed so the merger could move forward. One afternoon, while Julian was in a meeting, his father, Silas Vane, showed up at Ava's apartment. He didn't yell, he was worse. He offered her a check for $5 million to leave the city and never speak to Julian again. He told her that a woman like her would only drag Julian down into the mud. Ava didn't take the check. She opened the door and told Silas that his son was a human being, not a business asset. Silas left, but his parting look promised that he would destroy her if she stayed. Ava didn't tell Julian about the visit because she didn't want to cause more tension between him and his father. But Silas began to play dirty. Suddenly, the school where Ava worked received anonymous complaints about her character. She was placed on unpaid leave. Her landlord suddenly decided not to renew her lease. Everything in her life began to crumble, and she knew exactly who was behind it. She felt a deep sense of danger, not just for herself, but for Julian's reputation if she stayed by his side. Julian noticed Ava was pulled back and quiet. He found out about the school and the apartment, and he realized his father had declared war. He confronted Silas in a massive blowout that ended with Julian resigning from his own company. He walked away from his inheritance, his cars, and his status. He moved into a small hotel and told Ava that he would rather have nothing with her than everything without her. They spent a week in a bubble of happiness, planning a simple life together, unaware that Silas had one last card to play. Silas leaked a fake story to the press, claiming that Ava was a professional con artist who had targeted several wealthy men. He used edited photos to make it look like she was a criminal. The media swarmed Ava's neighborhood, and she became a pariah overnight. She couldn't walk down the street without being insulted. She realized that as long as she was with Julian, Silas would never stop hurting her. She decided the only way to save Julian was to leave him, even if it broke her heart into a million pieces. She wrote Julian a letter, telling him that she didn't love him and that his father was right. She was only after the money. It was the hardest thing she had ever done. She packed her bags and disappeared in the middle of the night, leaving the letter on the pillow. When Julian found it, he refused to believe it. He knew the woman who had saved him at the restaurant, and that woman wasn't a liar. He went to his father and told him that if anything happened to Ava, he would make sure the Vane Empire burned to the ground. The hour ends with Julian standing in Ava's empty apartment, clutching the letter. He saw a small smudge on the paper, a dried tear. He knew then that she had been forced to leave. He didn't go back to his father's company. Instead, he sold his expensive watch and his last remaining assets to hire a team to find her. He wasn't looking for a CEO's life anymore. He was a man on a mission to find the woman who had taught him how to breathe. 6 months passed. Ava was living in a quiet coastal town, working as a waitress in a small diner. She went by a different name and kept her head down. She missed Julian every single day, but she believed she was doing the right thing for his future. She watched the news sometimes and saw that Julian had disappeared from the public eye. People thought he had gone into hiding or lost his mind. She didn't know that Julian had spent every cent he had searching every small town on the map. Back in the city, the Vane Empire was failing. Without Julian's brilliance, Silas was losing billions. The board of directors was demanding Julian's return. Silas was forced to admit that he had made a mistake, but he didn't know where his son was. Julian had completely cut ties. He was working a construction job in a neighboring state, using his weekends to drive from town to town, showing Ava's picture to anyone who would look. He was thinner and tired, but his eyes were full of a fire that wouldn't go out. One rainy afternoon, Julian walked into a small diner on the coast. He was soaked to the bone and just wanted a cup of coffee. He sat at the counter, and a waitress walked over with a pot of coffee. When she saw him, she dropped the pot, and it shattered on the floor. It was Ava. They stared at each other for what felt like an eternity. The diner was full of people, but to them, the world was empty. Julian didn't ask her why she left. He just stood up and wrapped his arms around her, whispering that he had finally found his way home. Ava tried to push him away, telling him that his father would find them. Julian took her hands and told her that he didn't care. He told her that Silas had lost everything and that the Vane Empire was gone, but he didn't care about that either. He told her he had started a small consulting firm of his own and was making enough to build them a life. He told her he had spent 6 months proving his father wrong, that he didn't need a name or $1 billion to be a man worthy of her. Suddenly, a car pulled up outside. It was Silas. He had followed Julian's private investigators. He walked into the diner, looking old and defeated. He didn't come to fight. He came to beg Julian to come back and save the company. He looked at Ava and, for the first time, he apologized. He admitted that Ava was the only person who truly cared for Julian, while he had only cared for the business. He offered them both the company, but Julian just looked at Ava and shook his head. Julian told his father that he could keep the company or give it away, but Julian was never coming back to that world. He told Silas that he had found something worth more than all the gold in the world, a woman who saw him when he was invisible. Silas realized he had lost his son forever. He left the diner alone, walking out into the rain. Julian turned back to Ava and asked her if she was ready to stop running. She nodded, tears of joy streaming down her face, and they kissed as the locals in the diner cheered. The story ends 1 year later. Julian and Ava are standing on the balcony of a beautiful, modest house overlooking the ocean. They aren't in the news, and they don't have a security team. Julian has a successful small business, and Ava is teaching at the local school. They are happy, healthy, and free. As the sun sets, Julian looks at Ava and thanks her for ruining that blind date. He tells her it was the best thing that ever happened to him. She laughs, leans her head on his shoulder, and they watch the waves, knowing they finally have the life they chose for themselves.